The war scholars of the Vorthak Dominion had laughed when the first Terran traders spoke of their myths. It had been a quiet, almost dismissive sound, a ripple of metallic chittering from mandibles that rarely parted for anything less than a battle cry. The humans had stood there in their flimsy environmental suits, their soft faces exposed, their voices carrying the weight of stories instead of threats. They spoke of ancient warriors who fought with nothing but iron and fire, of predators that stalked their homeworld long before they tamed it, of eyes in the dark that watched and waited. The Vorthak had dismissed it as primitive superstition. Now, standing in the dim silver, purple glow of the Dominion's war chamber, High Commander Vorgel found himself staring at the same human eyes he had once scoffed at. Commander Jennifer McKay stood before him, her posture relaxed, her hands unarmed. She wore no armor, carried no visible weapon, just the dark fabric of her uniform and the insignia of the Terran Accord stitched over her heart. But her eyes, they were wrong. Not in color, not in shape, but in the way they held his gaze, the way they didn't flinch. Vorgel had faced down the apex predators of a dozen worlds, the razor-jawed hunters of Kethvar, the void, swimming leviathans of the Rissian abyss, even the dreaded shadow, stalkers of his own homeworld creatures that could shred armored plating with a single swipe. All of them had eyes that burned with hunger, with the instinct to kill. But human eyes were worse. They didn't just look at you, they understood you. Behind him, Gromnok, the Dominion's lead xenobiologist, shifted uneasily, his armored carapace clicking in the way that signaled discomfort. His data slate flickered with the same readings they had all seen, the same impossible scans of human physiology. The muscle density, the pain tolerance, the endurance. The humans should have been weak, fragile, and yet they weren't. Vorgel's mandibles tightened. The war scholars had been wrong. The Terran traders hadn't been telling myths. They had been giving warnings. The observation chamber hummed with the low, metallic thrum of Dominion power cores, their silver-purple energy signatures casting jagged reflections across the reinforced glass. Vorgel stood motionless, his armored exoskeleton absorbing the vibrations of the ship's engines like a predator, attuned to the pulse of its prey. Before him, suspended in the sterile glow of the interrogation field, was the human commander Jennifer McKay. She was restrained. Physically, at least. The Dominion's neural inhibitors should have rendered any species docile, their higher functions dulled into submission. But McKay's gaze was sharp, unbroken. She studied the chamber with the same detached precision Vorgel had seen in veteran hunters assessing a kill zone. Gromnok's talons tapped against his data slate, the sound brittle in the silence. The xenobiologist had spent cycles dissecting the biological quirks of lesser species, cataloging their weaknesses. But the human's readings defied categorization. Her adrenaline levels remained unnervingly stable. Her pupils didn't dilate in fear. Even her heartbeat was a steady, rhythmic thud, like the march of an approaching storm. This is wrong. Gromnok's posture screamed. She should be afraid. Vorgel flexed his claws. He had interrogated prisoners from a dozen systems, shattered warlords, defiant rebels, even the fanatical zealots of the Rissian cults. None had unsettled him like this, because McKay wasn't just unafraid. She was waiting. Behind the glass, the human shifted slightly, the restraints creaking under the motion. Her lips curled, not a smile, not a snarl. Something worse. Recognition, she knows. Vorgel realized she knows what we're seeing. Gromnok finally broke the silence, his voice a grating rasp. Your species lacks the physical superiority of the Dominion. Your technology is primitive. Your homeworld is a death trap of tectonic instability and atmospheric toxins. He gestured to the scans flickering across his slate. By all metrics, you should have gone extinct. McKay's gaze didn't waver. And yet, she said, her voice calm. Here I am. The words hung in the air like the aftershock of a detonation. Vorgel's mandibles twitched. He had seen this before. Not in prisoners, but in the apex predators of Kethvar. The way they would pause before the kill, calculating, savoring the inevitability of their victory. Humans weren't just resilient, they were patient. Gromnock's talons tightened around the data slate. "Explain," he demanded. McKay exhaled, slow and deliberate. "You're looking at the wrong numbers." She tilted her head, just slightly. "You see muscle density, pain tolerance, endurance, but you're missing the why." Vorgel's spine stiffened. The human leaned forward, the restraints groaning in protest. "Every predator on Earth," she said softly, "learns one lesson first. You don't stop hunting just because you're hurt." A chill slithered through the chamber. Gromnock's data. Slate clattered to the floor, and for the first time in his life, Vorgel felt the instinctive, primal urge to step back. Because the truth was there in McKay's eyes. Not hunger, and the Dominion had just made the fatal mistake of assuming that made them weak. Section Fae. The first myth, the unbreakable shield. The silence in the interrogation chamber was thick enough to choke on. Vorgel's secondary eyelids flicked shut for a fraction too long. A reflexive blink, the kind his species only exhibited when confronted with something their hindbrain couldn't immediately categorize as prey or predator. The human's words coiled in the air like the scent of ozone before a storm. Gromnock's talons twitched toward the fallen data slate but didn't retrieve it. His cranial ridges pulsed with the rapid-fire calculations of a scientist whose entire framework of understanding had just been upended. The numbers hadn't lied, but the interpretation, that was the flaw. McKay didn't move, didn't shift in her restraints. She simply watched, her gaze steady, unblinking, like a hunter waiting for the first sign of weakness. Vorgel had faced down Dominion warlords. He had stood in the command nexus of a dreadnought as it glassed entire worlds. But this was different. This wasn't war. This was revelation. The Vorthak Dominion had always prided itself on its shields, not the crude energy barriers lesser species relied upon, flickering and unstable under sustained fire. No, Vorthak shielding was perfection. Layered, adaptive, woven from silver-purple plasma matrices that could disperse kinetic energy, refract beams, and harden against particle bombardment. Their engineers had spent centuries refining the technology, forging it into an impenetrable bulwark. The Dominion's first encounter with human weaponry had been met with derision. Primitive railguns, unguided missiles, explosive charges that relied on chemical combustion rather than clean, controlled annihilation. Then came Thessalia. Thessalia. Fae was supposed to be a simple demonstration, a human colony newly established on the fringes of contested space. The Dominion had sent a single cruiser, its shields humming at full strength, its weapon arrays primed to deliver a single devastating strike, enough to crack the settlement's defenses and send the survivors scrambling. A warning, a statement. The humans had responded with a single ship of their own. Vorgel remembered the tactical feed, remembered the way the human vessel had drifted into position, its blocky utilitarian frame dwarfed by the sleek, predatory lines of the Vorthak cruiser. The Dominion officers had laughed, and then the Aegis fired. Not a railgun, not a missile, a solid tungsten projectile, unremarkable in design, accelerated to a fraction of light speed by a propulsion system the Dominion scanners couldn't even classify. The impact had been Vorthak shields, didn't fail. They recalibrated, they adapted. The projectile didn't punch through. It didn't overload. For the briefest instant, the shield's harmonic frequency shifted, and in that infinitesimal window, the tungsten mass slipped through, like a blade between ribs. The cruiser's command spire vaporized on impact. Gromnock's voice was hollow. "You knew." McKay didn't smile, didn't gloat. "Not at first," she admitted. "We just tested." Vorgel's mandibles clenched. That was the horror of it. The humans hadn't engineered a shield, piercing weapon. They had stumbled onto it, through trial and error, through failure, And then they had perfected it. Gromnock's talons scraped against the floor. Your species doesn't have shield technology. How could you possibly? McKay tilted her head. We don't rely on shields. A realization. Vorgel's blood ran cold. Thessalia hadn't been an anomaly. It had been a testament. The humans hadn't broken the Dominion shields because they had found a flaw. They had broken them because they had spent their entire bloody history learning how to break unbreakable things. Gromnock's talons left deep gouges in the polished alloy floor, his mind racing through calculations that no longer made sense. The Dominion's shield technology had been absolute, a perfect, unassailable barrier refined over centuries of warfare. The Vorthak had built an empire upon it, their fleets untouchable behind shimmering walls of silver-purple energy. And yet, the humans had shattered it with kinetic slugs, not exotic particle beams, not phase disruptors. Tungsten, raw, unrefined mass, hurled through the void like a stone from a primitive sling. The absurdity of it burned in Gromnock's secondary stomach like acid. Across the observation deck, Commander McKay stood motionless, her posture relaxed in a way that made his spines itch. She wasn't gloating, wasn't reveling in their disbelief. That was the most unsettling part. She expected this. As if the Dominion's greatest technological marvel being reduced to scrap was nothing more than an inevitable outcome. Vorgel's voice cut through the silence, his mandibles clicking in a tone Gromnock recognized suppressed fury. Explain. McKay exhaled, a slow, measured breath. You built your shields to stop energy weapons, plasma, particle beams, the kind of firepower a civilization uses when it expects its enemies to fight fair. We don't. Gromnock's neural tendrils twitched. The human's words were too simple, too dismissive of the Dominion's mastery. He had studied the archives of 100 conquered species, dissected their failed attempts to breach Vorthak defenses. None had ever succeeded. His mind flickered back to the battle recordings. The way the human railgun rounds had slipped through the shield harmonics like a blade, finding the gap in armor, not by overwhelming force, not by superior technology. By pattern recognition, a cold realization settled over him. The humans hadn't engineered Dominion tech. They hadn't needed to. They had spent their entire bloody history attacking, sieging castles, cracking bunkers, tunneling beneath walls. Their warfare wasn't about matching strength against strength. It was about finding the crack, and then driving a spike through it. Vorgel's armored carapace rattled, his voice a low growl. You are saying your species guessed how to bypass our defenses. McKay's lips twitched, not a smile, but something darker. We didn't guess, we experimented. Gromnock's talons flexed. That was the true horror. The humans hadn't known their weapons would work. They had just kept firing until something did. The observation deck of the Voidraiser hummed with the low metallic pulse of Vorthak power cores, their silver-purple energy casting jagged shadows across the bulkheads. Commander Jennifer McKay stood motionless before the panoramic viewport, her reflection a ghostly imprint against the void beyond. The stars here were different. Colder, sharper, their light refracted through the nebulous ionized gases like shards of broken glass. Behind her, Vorgel's massive frame loomed, his armored carapace absorbing the ambient glow of the ship systems. His primary eyes, twin pits of reflective black, tracked her with the precision of a predator assessing prey. Yet there was something new in that gaze now, not dismissal, not even caution, calculation. McKay didn't turn. She didn't need to. She could feel the shift in the air, the way the Vorthak officers had stopped, treating her like a curiosity, and started watching her like a live grenade. Gromnock's talons clicked against the deck plating as he approached. His data slate clutched in one clawed hand. The scientist had spent the last 6 hours dissecting the battle recordings, cross-referencing human tactics with Dominion shield harmonics. His findings had left him unnervingly silent. Now, he broke that silence. You fired 17 different munition types at our forward bastion before the railgun breach. His voice was a rasp, the translator struggling with the jagged edges of his native tongue. Each one a variation, each one tested. McKay exhaled slowly, her breath fogging the transperistyle for the briefest moment before vanishing. Yes, Gromnock's crest of sensory spines flexed, a reflexive display of agitation. You had no certainty any would work. We had probability. The Vorthak scientist hissed, a sound like pressurized gas escaping a ruptured line. Probability is not knowledge. McKay finally turned, her eyes locking onto his, human eyes, flat, depthless. The pupils swallowing light like event horizons. Knowledge is just probability refined by corpses. A ripple passed through the assembled Vorthak. Some recoiled, others stiffened, their combat instincts flaring at the implicit threat. But Vorgil did neither. The warlord remained utterly still, his secondary eyes, smaller, clustered along his brow, narrowing in something akin to recognition. He had seen that look before, not in diplomats, not in traitors, but in the apex predators of a dozen death worlds, the ones that stalked the killing fields of Vorthak's home continent, the ones that learned. McKay's lips parted, her next words deliberate, measured. You think we're reckless, that we throw ourselves at problems without thought. She tilted her head slightly, the motion eerily precise. But you're wrong, we don't guess, we sample, we adapt. Gromnock's talons flexed around the data, slate, the material groaning under the pressure. And when adaptation fails, McKay's smile was a scalpel's edge. Then we improvise. The deck shuddered as the Voidrazor's engine cycled up, the silver-purple cores flaring brighter in response to some unseen command. The light caught the scars along McKay's knuckles, old wounds, long healed, but never forgotten. Vorgil's voice cut through the hum of the ship, low and resonant. Your kind does not surrender. It wasn't a question. McKay met his gaze without flinching. We can't. And there it was, the second myth laid bare. The Dominion had dismissed human medics as non-combatants. They had laughed at the stories of battlefield surgeons stitching together dying soldiers only to send them back into the fray. But they had never understood, a surgeon's hands did not heal. They rebuilt, and what they rebuilt was worse. Gromnock's data, slate clattered to the deck, the screen fracturing under the impact. The battle recording still played, looped footage of human shock troops advancing through plasma fire, their armor blackened, their bodies broken, their rifles never silent. Not one of them had stopped. Not one of them had yielded. Vorgil's carapace plates ground together, the sound like grinding bones. You are not warriors. McKay's fingers brushed the viewport, her reflection merging with the starfield beyond. No, the warlord's spines flared. Then what are you? The human commander turned, her eyes reflecting the cold, surgical light of the Vorthak ship. Surgeons. And in that moment, the Dominion finally understood. Humanity did not fight to conquer, they fought to dissect. Section Fe. The archive's silence. The Vorthak archive chamber hummed with the low, throbbing pulse of silver, purple energy cores embedded in the walls. Data streams flickered across towering obsidian pillars, each one a monument to centuries of Dominion warfare. Gromnock's claws hovered over the console, the harsh glow of the holographic displays casting jagged shadows across his armored face. He had spent cycles here. The humans had left their mark on the Dominion's records, not in the neat, clinical logs of battle statistics, but in the gaps, the silences, the places where Vorthak analysts had stopped writing, their reports ending mid-sentence, their data corrupted by something they could not name. Gromnock's mandibles twitched as he pulled up the footage again. The human shock troops moved like a single organism, their blackened armor glistening under the plasma, scorched sky of Carxes Ix. They did not retreat, they did not falter. Even when their limbs were sheared off by Dominion artillery, they crawled. One of them, designation Webb, N, had dragged himself through a river of molten rock, his flesh bubbling, his rifle still firing. The recording ended there. The Vorthak who had witnessed it had not logged the aftermath. Gromnock's claws tightened around the console's edge. The humans were not like the other species the Dominion had broken. They did not shatter, they adapted, and what they became after adaptation was something the Vorthak had no name for. A shadow fell across the hologram. Vorgil stood at the chamber's entrance, his massive frame outlined by the violet glare of the corridor's energy conduits. His carapace was still scarred from the last engagement. Deep, jagged furrows where human monomolecular blades had bitten through military-grade alloy. "You are still searching," the warlord rumbled. Gromnock did not look up. "For what they are." Vorgil's spines flexed, a ripple of unease moving through them. "We know what they are, surgeons." The word came out like a curse, laced with something darker. Gromnock exhaled through his vents, the sound a hiss of static. "No, that is only what they do." His claws tapped the console, summoning another file, one buried deep in the restricted archives. A single image flickered to life, a human face, its eyes hollow, its mouth stretched in something that was not a smile. A prisoner. From the First War, the Vorthak interrogators had logged their findings in clinical detail. Subject exhibits no fear response, no pain threshold, no survival instinct. And then, the final note, written in a trembling hand, "It is learning." Vorgil's talons flexed. "They are machines." Gromnock shut off the display. The archive chamber plunged into near darkness, lit only by the pulse of the energy cores. No, machines break. The silence between them was thick, heavy with the weight of something neither warrior could voice. Outside, the void stretched endlessly, cold and indifferent. And somewhere in that void, the humans were waiting. The archive had no answers for what came next. The archive chamber hummed with the low, pulsing thrum of the Vorthak's silver. Purple energy cores, their harsh light casting jagged shadows across the walls. Vorgil stood motionless, his armored plates shifting minutely as his muscles tensed beneath. The image of the human prisoner lingered behind his eyes, those hollow, unblinking eyes. Machines broke, humans did not. Gromnock's claws hovered over the console, hesitating before inputting another command. The screen flickered, then resolved into grainy footage, an old battlefield recording from the First Contact War. The scene was carnage. Vorthak warriors lay strewn across the battlefield, their silver-purple armor rent open, their bodies twisted in unnatural angles. The camera shuddered, panning across the wreckage before locking onto a lone human figure. It moved wrong, not with the mechanical precision of a drone, nor the feral desperation of a cornered beast. It moved fluidly, its limbs bending in ways that should have been impossible, its steps silent despite the weight of its battered combat rig. Blood streaked its face, dark and drying, but its eyes, those eyes burned. The human turned its head slowly, as if sensing the camera. Then it smiled, not in triumph, not in madness, but in recognition. Vorgil's spine stiffened. He had seen death in 1,000 forms, had dealt it himself with ruthless efficiency. But this was something else. The human lunged, the feed cut to static. Gromnock exhaled, his breath a thin hiss through his nasal vents. The interrogators were wrong. It wasn't learning. His voice was low, grating. It was remembering. Vorgil's talons flexed. Explain. Gromnock pulled up another file. This one not a military report, but a cultural archive, a myth, the dancing dead. The legend spoke of an ancient predator, long extinct, that had once hunted the Vorthak's ancestors. It did not run. It did not stalk. It danced. Its movements, a grotesque mockery of grace. Its eyes alight with something that was neither hunger nor hate, but something deeper, something older. And when it killed, it did so with a smile. The archive's translation was rough. But the meaning was clear. The creature had not been an animal. It had been a hunter in the purest sense, one that took joy in the act itself. Vorgil stared at the frozen image of the human on the screen. The resemblance was undeniable. Outside, the void pressed against the station's hull, vast and uncaring. Somewhere in that darkness, the humans waited. Not as invaders, not as soldiers, but as predators, and they had been waiting for a very, very long time. Gromnak shut off the display. The chamber plunged into near darkness once more. The only light the pulse of the energy cores, their silver-purple glow flickering like dying stars. Neither warrior spoke. There was nothing left to say. The silence in the chamber was thick enough to choke on. Vorgil's claws flexed against the console, the metal groaning under the pressure. His mind raced, not with battle plans or tactical assessments, but with something far more unsettling: recognition. The humans had not simply evolved as predators. They had chosen it. Gromnak's data scroll lay discarded, its holographic text still flickering with the last fragments of the translated human archives. Trade logs, merchant manifests, ledgers of goods exchanged across star systems that should have been beyond their reach. At first glance, they were mundane, grain shipments, not crude blades or primitive firearms, not the clumsy tools of a young species still learning the weight of violence. These were engineered things, refined, tested, and beneath every transaction, a single phrase, repeated like a mantra: fair trade. Vorgil's mandibles twitched. The words were a lie, a predator's joke, because the humans had not traded for survival. They had traded for war. The station's observation deck offered a view of the void, endless and indifferent. The human vessel hung in the darkness, its silhouette jagged, its hull scarred from battles the Vorthak had never witnessed. Commander Jennifer McKay stood at the viewport, her reflection a ghost against the stars. Behind her, Captain Nathan Webb exhaled, the sound sharp in the quiet. "You think they've figured it out yet?" McKay didn't turn. "Does it matter?" Webb's grin was all teeth. "Not to us." Gromnak had spent cycles studying the humans, their biology, their technology, their history, but he had missed the truth. The ledgers were not records of commerce. They were hunting logs. Every trade route mapped a predator's path. Every exchange, a test of prey. The humans had not stumbled into the galaxy blind. They had stalked into it, measuring the strength of every species they encountered. And when they found weakness, they did not attack. They waited, because humans did not conquer. They collected. Vorgil's calm crackled. "High Commander," the voice was strained. "The human ship, its energy signature." He didn't need the report. The scanners told him everything. The human vessel's core pulsed, its power not the harsh silver, purple of Vorthak technology, but something deeper, something hungry. It was the same energy that had once lit the eyes of the creature in the archive, the same energy that burned in McKay's gaze as she turned from the viewport. "Tell me, Captain," she murmured. "How long do you think they'll last?" Webb checked his sidearm. "Not long enough." Outside, the void watched, and the humans smiled. The void between stars was never truly empty. Vorgil knew this. Every Vorthak did. Space was a battlefield, a graveyard, a hunting ground, its darkness thick with the ghosts of dead empires and the whispers of predators long since turned to dust. But as his command vessel's scanners flickered, struggling to parse the data flooding in from the human warship, he realized something far worse. The void was listening, and the humans had been speaking to it. McKay's fingers traced the edge of the holodisplay, her touch light, almost reverent. The projection shimmered, its glow casting sharp shadows across the command deck, shadows that moved wrong, that stretched too long, that flickered as though something unseen passed through them. The Vorthak had dismissed human technology as crude. A mistake. What pulsed within the human vessel was not mere machinery. It was something older, something that recognized the shape of teeth. "Activate the beacon." McKay said. Webb didn't hesitate. His hand moved to the console, inputting codes that weren't numbers so much as invitations. The ship's core flared, and the void answered. Gromnock's claws dug into the armrests of his station as the scanners screamed. The energy readings were impossible. The human ship's signature had changed, its power not just increasing but unfolding, peeling back layers of reality like skin from bone. Then the first silhouette emerged, not from the human ship. From the dark, it was a vessel. No, the corpse of one. Its hull was pitted, scarred, its architecture ancient, its edges blurred as though half submerged in some unseen tide. It moved without thrusters, without the harsh silver-purple burn of Vorthak drives. It simply was, sliding into existence like a knife from a sheath. Then another, and another. Gromnock's breath caught. The myths of the Terran traders, the stories of a fleet that sailed the black not in ships, but in echoes, had been laughed at in every scholarly hall from the core worlds to the fringe. No one was laughing now. Vorgel's calm erupted. High Commander, multiple contacts, unknown configuration, energy signatures matched the human vessel, but the officer's voice cut off. On the view screen, the human warship hung motionless, its hull now thrumming with that same deep, hungry light. Around it, the silhouettes gathered. Dozens. They had no markings, no flags, no allegiance save one. McKay's voice was soft. Every species that's ever hunted, she said, leaves something behind. Webb checked his sidearm again. Ours just stayed. The Vorthak scanners couldn't lock onto the newcomers. Their readings flickered, unstable, as though the ships existed in multiple places at once, or none at all. Gromnock's claws trembled. This wasn't technology. This was memory. The human fleet wasn't calling reinforcements. It was waking them up. The first Vorthak ship died without warning. One moment, it hung in formation, its shields at full strength, its weapons primed. The next, something passed through it. A shadow, a blade, a whisper, and then it was simply gone. Its hull collapsing inward like paper in a fist. No explosion, no debris. Just silence. Vorgel's spines locked. The humans hadn't hidden their strength. Dead hidden their ghosts. McKay watched as the silent fleet moved. They didn't attack. They remembered. And what they remembered was war. Outside, the void listened, and the humans smiled. The Vorthak command hub was a tomb of flickering silver-purple light, the air thick with the acrid scent of ionized metal and fear. Vorgel stood motionless at the tactical display, his claws embedded in the console's surface, his spines rigid with attention no warrior should ever know. The holographic projection before him was a mockery, a battlefield rendered in cold, sterile vectors, where ships were icons and death was data. But the void outside was not sterile. It was alive, and it was hungry. Gromnock's voice was a rasp, his vocal cords strained from the effort of keeping his terror contained. The readings, they're impossible. The energy signatures don't follow any known quantum model. They're not bending space, they're ignoring it. Vorgel didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the human fleet, or what the sensors claimed was the human fleet. The ships flickered in and out of existence, their outlines smearing like ink in water, their movements too fluid, too wrong. They didn't travel. They remembered where they wanted to be. And then they were there. A Vorthak destroyer, the Harrow's Fang, vanished next. One moment, its engines burned bright against the void, its weapon banks humming with lethal intent. The next, something dark and shapeless passed through it, a thing that was not a ship, not a weapon, but a presence. And the Harrow's Fang crumpled like foil in a fist. No explosion, no debris, just silence. Vorgel's blood ran cold. This was not war. This was reckoning. McKay stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, her hands clasped behind her back, her expression unreadable. The crew around her worked in hushed efficiency, their faces pale but determined. They had trained for this, not for the battle, but for the aftermath. For the moment, the galaxy remembered what humans were. Captain Nathan Webb exhaled slowly beside her, his fingers flexing around the grip of his sidearm. "They don't understand," he murmured. McKay didn't look at him. "They will." On the view screen, the silent fleet moved again, and the void shuddered. Gromnock's claws scraped against the console as he frantically recalibrated the scanners. "There's no pattern," he hissed. "No targeting systems, no energy spikes. They're not even firing weapons." Vorgel's mandibles tightened. That was the horror. The humans weren't firing. They were remembering how to kill, and the universe was remembering with them. The third Vorthak ship died screaming, not with sound. Sound did not exist in the vacuum, but with light. Its hull split like overripe fruit, its silver-purple energy cores rupturing in a silent, sickening bloom. The scanners registered nothing. No impact, no projectile, just death. Vorgel's spines flattened against his back. The college had been wrong. The humans had never been weak. They had simply been waiting. Outside, the void listened, and the humans smiled. The third Vorthak ship had died without a sound, but its death echoed through the fleet like a scream. Vorgel's claws dug into the command console, the dark steel groaning under the pressure. His spines, usually rigid with authority, lay flat against his back, an instinctive submission to something his mind refused to accept. The scanners showed nothing. No weapon signatures, no energy surges, no telltale distortions of subspace munitions. Just the ship's carcass drifting in the void, its silver-purple core flickering like a dying star. Gromnock's voice was a rasp of static over the comms. "They're not even using technology." That was the truth of it. The humans weren't fighting with weapons. They were fighting with memory. Commander Jennifer McKay stood motionless on the bridge of the Indomitable, her hands clasped behind her back. The holographic display painted her face in shifting hues of violet and gunmetal, the reflection of dying Vorthak ships flickering in her eyes. She didn't blink, didn't flinch. She had warned them. The College of War Scholars had laughed when the Terran traders spoke of ancient myths, of warriors who could kill with a thought, of battles fought in the space between heartbeats. The Vorthak had dismissed it as primitive superstition, the desperate stories of a species too weak to face reality. But now, reality was facing them, and it wore human skin. Captain Nathan Webb exhaled slowly, his fingers hovering over the tactical display. The system was simple, too simple: a single input, a single command, initiate protocol, eschaton. He didn't press it. The Vorthak fleet was still moving, still regrouping, their brutalist warships forming a defensive crescent around their command vessel. They thought they understood war. They thought they understood fear. They were wrong. Vorgel's mandibles twitched as he watched the human fleet. They weren't advancing, weren't retreating. They simply existed in the void, their ships dark and silent, their weapons cold. That was the most terrifying thing of all. The Vorthak had built their empire on conquest, on the certainty that strength was measured in firepower and fury. But the humans, they had built theirs on something far older. On patience, on the knowledge that predators did not need to roar to be heard. Gromnock's claws trembled as he pulled up the last transmission from the dying ship. The data was corrupted, fragmented, but one image remained clear. A human face, not on a view screen, not in a recording, in the reflection of the Vorthak captain's dying eyes. And it was smiling. The void listened. The humans remembered, and the Vorthak finally understood why every apex species in the galaxy had feared them. Not because of their weapons, not because of their ships, but because of what lived behind their eyes. Something ancient, something hungry, something that had been waiting for this moment since the first stars burned. Section Fae. The lesson: the void between stars had never felt so heavy. Vorgel stood on the observation deck of his flagship, The silver spike, its silver-purple hull still scarred from the battle that had shattered his fleet. The remnants of his armada drifted like broken teeth in the dark, their harsh energy signatures flickering in erratic pulses. He had expected rage. He had expected grief. Instead, there was only silence, the kind that came when a predator realized, too late, that it had stepped into another's hunting grounds. Behind him, Gromnock's talons clicked against the deck, the sound brittle in the artificial gravity. The scientist had not slept since the battle. His crest, once proud and rigid with authority, now lay flat against his skull, dulled by exhaustion. His datapad displayed the same image on loop, the human face, frozen in the reflection of a dead captain's eyes, not in triumph, not in cruelty, the way a wolf smiles before the kill. Commander Jennifer McKay's ship. The Dauntless hung motionless in the void, its blackened hull absorbing the starlight rather than reflecting it. To the Vorthak scanners, it was an absence, a hole in the universe where a warship should have been. Vorgil had seen human vessels before. He had dismissed them as crude, their designs lacking the brutal elegance of Vorthak engineering. But the Dauntless was different. It did not bristle with weapons. It did not glow with the harsh silver, purple of military power cores. And that was worse. Captain Nathan Webb stood at the edge of the Dauntless bridge, his hands clasped behind his back. The Vorthak had expected him to gloat, to demand surrender, to unleash the full might of his ship upon the broken remnants of their fleet. Instead, he had opened a channel, a single word transmitted on all frequencies. Not a plea, not a threat, a statement, the way a teacher speaks to a child who has finally learned their lesson. Gromnock's claws tightened around the datapad. The human smile haunted him, not because it was alien, but because it was familiar. The Vorthak had legends of creatures that lurked in the dark between stars, beings older than empires, older than language, beings that did not hunt for food or territory or glory, beings that hunted because it was what they were. And now, staring into the void where the Dauntless floated, Gromnock understood. The humans had not become predators. They had remembered. Vorgil exhaled, his breath fogging the observation glass. The Dauntless had not moved, had not powered its weapons, had not even activated its shields. It simply watched. And in that moment, the great Vorthak commander, conqueror of 100 worlds, felt something he had never known before. Not of death, not of defeat, but of the quiet, terrible certainty in the human's eyes. The certainty of something that had waited millennia for this moment. The void listened. The humans remembered. And the Vorthak finally understood why every apex species in the galaxy had feared them. Not because of their weapons, not because of their ships, but because of what lived behind their eyes. Something ancient, something hungry, something that had been waiting for this moment since the first stars burned. The Dauntless turned, its engines flaring once, a single pulse of light in the dark. Then it was gone, leaving only silence. And the lesson, the aftermath of silence, the Vorthak fleet remained motionless in the void, their warships hanging like frozen sentinels in the dark. The Dauntless had vanished, leaving no trace, no warp signature, no debris, not even the faintest echo of its passage. It had simply ceased to be there, as if it had never existed at all. Commander Vorsk did not speak. His mandibles remained locked, his claws curled into fists so tight they threatened to pierce his own armored palms. The bridge was silent, save for the faint hum of life support and the occasional shuddering breath from one of his officers. No one dared to move. No one dared to acknowledge what had just happened, because to acknowledge it was to accept the truth. The humans had not fled. They had not surrendered. They had allowed the Vorthak to see them. And then, when the lesson was delivered, they had left, not in retreat, but in dismissal. A low, guttural sound escaped Vorsk's throat. It was not a snarl of rage, nor a growl of defiance. It was something far worse. It was understanding. His second in command, Kesh, finally broke the silence. High Commander orders. Worst did not answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the empty space where the Dauntless had been. His mind raced through the implications, the histories, the whispered warnings from the oldest Vorthak archives, the ones that spoke of the others who had once ruled the stars, the ones who had vanished, leaving only ruins and cautionary tales, the ones who had, perhaps, not vanished at all. Recall all forward scouts, Vorsk said at last, his voice hollow. Pull back our patrols from the human border sectors and send a priority transmission to the High Conclave. Kesach hesitated. What do we tell them? Worsk turned his head slowly, his eyes burning with the weight of revelation. Tell them we were wrong. The words settled like a death sentence because the Vorthak did not admit error, but they had just witnessed something that defied denial. The humans had not built their empire on the corpses of their enemies. They had built it on the bones of something far older, and now, at last, they had chosen to remind the galaxy of that fact. The bridge remained silent as the fleet turned, their engines igniting in unison, not in pursuit, but in retreat. For the first time in Vorthak history, they were not the hunters, they were the prey, and somewhere in the dark, the humans watched and waited.